I'm sure you weren't there physically in Jackson Hole this year. You were missed, of course, but you were certainly there in spirit, and I'm sure you were watching this as closely as everybody else. You know, a lot of people say he got a lot further than first base with this speech. Do you think it was a home run?
I think he hit exactly what he wanted to hit. The markets at first didn't seem to really believe him. When you looked at initially at the market reaction, it's like, oh, well, doesn't really seem to be much here. Then as they thought about it a little bit more, they said, this guy's serious. He just spoke for 8 or 9 minutes, and he had one message, and the message is really clear. We're going to keep at it until we're done.
What did Jay Powell realize between, say, his after the July meeting, his press conference, and Jackson Hole?
I think what you heard was a series of speeches by Fed officials, including some officials like Neil Kashkari, who had been very dovish and had said, well, maybe we should wait. We should be a little bit more cautious about raising rates. And even he said, we're going to be raising rates, and we're not going to be pivoting anytime soon. So I think there was a very clear disconnect between the interpretation that the markets had put on what the meeting result was and what the FOMC members believed the meeting result was. And they were very, very clear, and I think Jay was super clear at Jackson Hole.
What's the risk here of over-tightening? And is over-tightening a bit like art? You know, you don't know what it is until you see it.
Well, as Milton Friedman, my predecessor for many years at University of Chicago, had famously said, monetary policy has an impact with long and variable lags. So the Fed really just started getting going, taking the punch bowl away about 6 months ago. And so I think we're just starting to see more of an impact in terms of housing markets, in terms of we really haven't seen it in the labor market yet. My guess is we'll start seeing that over the next 6 months. And so that's why it's more of an art than a science, because we don't know exactly when it's going to have the impact and how much impact it will have. But I think over the next 6 months we're going to see. But I think the Fed, exactly as Jay said, they're going to bring rates up probably around the 4% or so area, and they're going to keep them there a while until they're convinced that inflation is coming down.
Well, we heard from Senator Elizabeth Warren. She's worried that this is going to tip the U.S. into recession. Is that a concern that you share, and how deep could that recession potentially be?
Well, it is a risk that there could be a recession. I mean, Jay had said, he says that they will have a period of below-trend growth, which of course could include a recession. People forget that the Fed's mission was to take the punch bowl away when the party really got going. Over the last 25 years, the Fed has always been there to provide support to try to cushion negative shocks to the economy. But that's just what central banks do. They have to take the punch bowl away at some point. And so, unfortunately, I think many policymakers have forgotten that that's ultimately what the Fed needs to do. How deep the recession, or if there is a recession, I think there is very much a heightened chance of recession. How deep it'll be, I think a lot of that's going to depend on Mr. Putin and shocks in the geopolitical sphere.
In terms of how high the rate is going to have to go, it's getting so that 4% is kind of middle of the road. Esther George was saying, sure, it could go above 4%. I pushed her on that, and she said, okay, because John Taylor said it. She said, well, yeah, you could. But number one, do you think they might have to go that high? And do you think that Jay Powell has the will to lead them that high?
So I think it's very clear that they're on a path to get close to 4 by the end of the year, unless there's some other shocks that come in, or that we get wildly different prints on inflation over the last 3 months of the year. And then they're on track to raise rates a little bit more in the first quarter of next year. So I think that's going to get them to a 4 handle. Now, how much above 4 they will have to go, I don't know. That's going to depend on how inflation evolves. But I think Jay made it pretty clear that he's going to lead the Fed there, and he's going to hold the Fed there. They're going to wait until their mission is done.
I mean, there was a paper presented on quantitative tightening in all of its aspects, and a lot of discussion, Randy, about, you know, it's not that hard. It's pretty simple to do quantitative easing, right? But getting unwound is much more complicated potentially. How is that going to play out, and is it going to be one of the elements the Fed says this is what we're using to tighten?
So the Fed likes to keep monetary policy focused on interest rates and to leave the balance sheet sort of something that's in the background. And I think that's, obviously there's been relatively little discussion of the balance sheet since they started the reduction earlier this year. And I think they're likely to keep it that way unless there's some sort of liquidity crisis. I think they're just going to let it gradually come down as more in the background, but keep monetary policy primarily focused on interest rates.